If you're of a certain age, the storyline of the typical anti-drug ad
This is your brain on drugs.
is probably burned into your brain.
This is crack.
Someone gives into peer pressure or curiosity, tries drugs for the first time. It seems harmless enough. Pretty soon, addiction takes hold, and they're on a sharp downward spiral, losing money, jobs, and friends. Then they bottom out, maybe end up on the streets, maybe in jail, maybe dead. Those ads were a little over the top.
I just want to shake some sense into you kids that are using drugs and thinking about using.
Okay, way over the top. And as a result, most of us tuned out the most hysterical warnings about drugs a long time ago. Which is a little bit of a problem. Because these days, one drug in particular may actually justify the hysteria. Less than 1 in 100,000. That's how many Americans died from drug overdoses annually in the years between 1945 and 1966. Now, maybe you're thinking, yeah, but how many people were doing hard drugs back then? So, the overdose rate at the height of the crack epidemic? 3 in 100,000. And then, things started to change. Between 1990 and 2000, the death rate doubled. Then doubled again between 2000 and 2010. Then tripled between 2010 and 2020. In 2021, over 111,000 people died from overdosing. Almost as many as died from homicide, suicide, and car accidents combined. What changed? Well, the statistics tell the story. In 2021, 2/3 of those overdose deaths were caused by synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Every overdose death is a tragedy. But in this new era, the story of those tragedies often don't follow the same plot lines they used to. In past drug crises, overdose deaths tended to come at the end of long, desperate struggles with addiction. But because fentanyl is so potent, 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine, it has a much greater likelihood of killing even an infrequent user with any given use. And what compounds the danger is how often fentanyl slips undetected into all kinds of other drugs. Much of the heroin sold on the street is actually fentanyl. Fentanyl is often added to cocaine or even passed off as it. Many varieties of illegal pills are just pressed fentanyl. And too often, users won't know until it's too late. But why would fentanyl be getting into the supply of other drugs in the first place? The answer to that question is at the very heart of the fentanyl epidemic. Not only is fentanyl incredibly potent, but it's also incredibly cheap, which means more money for drug dealers who substitute it for more expensive substances. And the reason fentanyl is so cheap is also the reason it's now so abundant. In the past, there were physical factors limiting the supply of illegal drugs. If you were in the cocaine or heroin business, you were limited by the amount of land it took to grow your supply. There were limits to how potent a drug you could grow, and the physical size of it made it more likely that you'd get caught by law enforcement at some point. But with synthetic opioids, all that work can get done in the lab. Hardly any physical footprint, you can design the drug to be as potent as you want, and much less chance of getting caught. So for drug traffickers, fentanyl is fantastic. Cheaper, easier, and so addictive you almost guarantee yourself repeat customers. So, what can we do to combat this crisis? The most straightforward step is making sure that more Americans know just how great the risks associated with fentanyl are. After that, it gets tougher. First, there's the issue of dealing with the people responsible for supplying the drugs. We know where the problem is coming from. As of just a few years ago, estimates were that as much as 90% of the world's fentanyl was coming out of China. But in 2019, Beijing declared that it would start cracking down on the drug trade, which doesn't mean what it sounds like. Today, the fentanyl trade is primarily being run by Mexican cartels, who get all the materials they need for the drugs from China, in return for which the cartels work with Chinese money laundering operations. And the story gets even murkier than that, because thanks to legal loopholes, a lot of fentanyl money is actually laundered right here in the United States, too. In 2017, for example, the Justice Department brought charges against 2 Chinese nationals who were shipping drugs to 37 different states through a shell company run out of Massachusetts. The trend grew so bad that it led Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to declare that America had become perhaps the best place in the world to hide and launder dirty money. So, step 1, start by cleaning up our own contributions to the problem. Then there's the hardest question. How do we help the people already caught in addiction? And some of the most common answers don't solve as many problems as we'd hope. For example, providing drug users access to naloxone, a medication that can reverse overdoses, helps prevent deaths at locations where it's handed out, but does nothing to help the same person the next time they use. As a result, research shows that it's often little more than the difference between overdosing today or overdosing tomorrow. Research on the strategy of giving drug users clean needles suggests that while it may be successful at reducing things like HIV infection, it actually seems to increase the overdose rate. The data does, however, point to one tool that's more effective: getting users treatment that includes medication that calms the craving for opioids. And while about half of users still relapse, that's still potentially millions of lives changed. One study estimated that there are about 7.6 million Americans who suffer from an opioid abuse disorder, but only about 1 million receiving medication-assisted treatment. America has never seen a drug crisis quite like this one before, one where even a casual user could face as much threat of an overdose as the most serious addict. Will we figure out how to deal with it? We'll have to, because the consequences of failure would be too terrible to bear.